At a young age, Jack was diagnosed with an incurable disease. And as you can imagine, it brought a lot of physical and emotional pain into his life. But through that suffering, through that experience, the lessons he learned and the transformation that he experienced led him to say this: "The thing I wish most never happened, I am most grateful for." In this episode, we dive into that. Especially we talk about like what led up to that transformation and so much more, like the bitterness and the loneliness that he felt going through all of that in the moment that transformed his disease from a description to a dare. We also hit on the lessons that he learned from his pain and how his life looks different now. He answers the question, how do we actually transform? How do we transform in a way that actually lasts, that actually changes us into a better version of ourselves? We talk about our tendency to replay the trauma that we've endured and what to do if you feel stuck. And finally, why we need mentors in our lives to guide us, to challenge us, but also to kind of point out our blind spots. So if you or someone you know has struggled navigating, pain and suffering in your life, you're not going to want to miss this episode. Stay with us. Welcome to the Restored Podcast, helping you heal and grow from the trauma of your parents' divorce, separation, or broken marriage so you can break that cycle. I'm your host, Joey Panarelli. This is episode 123. We're so happy that so many of you have found this podcast helpful and even healing. We've heard numerous stories of people who've just been really helped by the podcast. One listener said this: "I'm so thankful for finding this community. Your podcast couldn't have come at a better time. I literally found it only days after your first episode, and it was so therapeutic and helpful. It feels so good and sad, of course, to know that the feelings you have growing up in such an environment are something others also can relate to. Earlier, I have been made to believe that my feelings are over the top and have been told, especially by my mom, that all people have problems and that the world still has to go on. Now I know that it is allowed to have unfinished emotions and that you can't just brush problems under a rug. I like that you encourage us to take steps to try to heal and deal with the wrongs from our past. Thank you for that." Again, we're so happy to hear it's been helpful and even healing. We do it for you. Today's episode is sponsored by Dakota Lane Fitness. If you've ever felt intimidated by working out or eating healthy, or perhaps you've tried workout programs and meal plans that just didn't work for you, then this is especially for you. Dakota Lane is a nationally certified fitness and nutrition coach who's helped about 1,000 clients worldwide, including moms of 10 kids, CEOs, MLB baseball players, 75-year-olds, and people who've never even set foot in a gym. Dakota builds customized fitness and nutrition plans with around-the-clock accountability and one-on-one coaching for people anywhere in the world in a safe and approachable environment. But what else makes Dakota different than the numerous fitness and nutrition coaches out there? I want to mention 3 things. 1, he's done it himself. He's a very healthy, ripped dude. He's also a good, virtuous man too. He's not just, obsessed with the way that he looks. Second thing is he actually studied to become a priest for a little while, and through that experience and studying at Franciscan University and the Augustine Institute, he developed the belief that to live a fully human life involves not just growing in one area, such as your spiritual life, and neglecting the rest of yourself, like your body. We really need to care for it all so that we can become more virtuous and more free to love. And the final thing is Dakota's mission is not just to help people, look good on the beach or something like that. His mission is to really lead people to experience the highest quality of life through intentional discipline and treating their bodies the way that they were made to be treated. And so if you desire freedom, if you desire transforming your body and your life, Dakota can help you. One client said this: "Dakota Lane changed my life. And the best part is that what I once thought was impossible was made so doable and realistic by Dakota. This program is worth every penny. If you have struggled in the past and can't seem to find a way to change yourself for the better, look no further. Dakota Lane is your man." And so if you want to see what Dakota offers and the amazing transformations that his clients have achieved, just go to dakotalanefitness.com, or just click on the link in the show notes. By the way, this is the last time that you'll hear about Dakota Lane Fitness. So if you're on the fence, maybe you've heard this before and like, man, I would like to check that out. I recommend just doing 3 really simple things. One is just go to his website, click on the show notes, go to dakotalanefitness.com, just go to the website. once you're on there, he has a transformations page. At this recording, he has this transformations page, and you'll see kind of a mix of before and after pictures as well as testimonials from his clients, just to see how Dakota has helped other people. And then finally, if you want to take another step in that direction, you can schedule a free consult. Just click on the contact button on his website, and you can fill out a form to just schedule a free consult with him. And you can just get a little bit more information about what it might look like, the pricing and everything of working with Dakota. And again, you have nothing to lose, just a little bit of time and effort, but I'm sure it will help you. And so I definitely recommend checking him out. Again, go ahead and click on the link in the show notes or go to dakotalanefitness.com to make use of all that. My guest today is Jack Beers. Jack is the founder and leader of the Catholic Mentor. On top of over a decade in ministry as a speaker and leader, Jack is a certified mentor through the Catholic Psych Institute. He is trained to accompany individuals through the storms of life by an integration, sound psychology, and authentic Catholic anthropology. It's kind of big words, but we'll break into those in this episode. The certification was developed and led by Dr. Gregory Bottaro. Jack lives in Cincinnati with his wife and their 2 children. So without waiting any longer, here's my conversation with Jack. Jack, so good to have you. Welcome.
Great to be here with you, Joey. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk with you. I have to ask kind of the obvious question, given your last name, do you like beer? Do you drink beer?
Yeah. So I usually, when people ask me, oh, your name's Jack Beers, that's awesome. What a great name. I'll usually be like, my middle name is Daniels with an S. I'm very Irish. I have Irish parents, and it's not, but people get really pumped by it. I mean, I literally have a memory of being 10 and being in a baseball field and having high schoolers come up to you and be like, wow, one day you're going to have some great parties, man. Going to be awesome. And I'm an irony. I can't drink beer. So it's just a walking irony. Like people like, oh, I want to drink beer with this guy. Well, I can't. If you want to Jameson on the rocks, we could do that together. But I'm not going to fulfill your lifelong fantasy of watching someone with the last name of Beers, drain a beer or whatever.
I love the Jack Daniels joke. That's legend. Good stuff, man. Well,
yeah.
Shifting to more serious items, I know, a lot of people listening right now have endured a lot of pain, a lot of suffering because of their parents' divorce, the breakdown of their family, and everything that comes along with that. And so while that might not be specifically a part of your story, I know you have suffered. Tell us about that.
That's quite the transition. I'm so grateful to be able to go deep here with you. Suffering has been a huge part of my life. And it's been, I think Tolkien said this. He's like, the thing for which I wish most never happened, I am most grateful for. He said that. And I very much come to a place of that, where the things that I wish most never happened to me are the things in which I'm most grateful for at the same time. And it took a long time to get there. It took a lot of work to get there. But I do like to frame the idea of suffering. Like, I know that people have suffered more than me. And I know that the suffering that I have is, relatively speaking, is what it is. But it is still real, and it is still difficult and challenging. Anyway, so to the details of it. When I was 11, I've always been like this. I've always been like tall and lanky, and like a strong breeze could blow me over. So I've never been necessarily robust physically. And when I was 11, I lost 15 pounds in 10 days and had a shortcut. And, I looked like I was dying. I looked like I was a cancer patient. You could see my ribs and all this stuff. And it turned out that I had something called Crohn's disease, which is a chronic illness. And this is like 2001. There's no gluten-free anything anywhere. There's not like celiac is just known by people. It's like no one in my circle had ever heard of Crohn's disease unless they're part of the medical community. And so my parents and I, we have no idea what's happening. It's like you lose, 15 pounds in 10 days. And now you have this thing, it's called Crohn. And I remember I'm 11, I have a fever, and Crohn's can manifest itself in all different kinds of ways. And for me, I had like an exterior abscess. And so it was painful. Like I couldn't walk from 15 feet from my room to the bathroom. I couldn't physically do it. It was too painful for me to do. It just like hurt too much to move. So I'm like sitting in this doctor's office and I'm 11 and I have a fever. It's like 102, 103, and it's just constant. Like I can't move. I'm in a lot of pain. I just found out I have Crohn's disease, and this doctor's like, okay, you're in a great spot. You know, I'm the best doctor in the East Coast for this. I have access to the best medication in the world, and I can get you down to 3 hospital stays a year every year for the rest of your life. And my parents were just like, what? 3 hospital stays a year every year for the rest of his life? Like, what does that mean? What is his life going to look like? And this doctor straight up just went, you're not going to be taller than 5'2". You're not going to be able to hold down a job. You won't be able to go away to college. Like you need to understand something. Like, your son is now disabled. That's what it is. And I was like, I mean, I'm 11, but you're even at 11, right? Like you're conscious of what's happening. I'm aware of what this guy is saying. And I remember my mom looking at me and being like, that will not be your life. Like whatever that man said, like throw it out of your mind. Like that will not be your life. But I kind of believe the doctors.
Yeah.
More than I believe my mom there. And so through the first 4 years of me having Crohn's disease, I missed over 250 days of school. I barely grew. I mean, everything but the number of hospital stays was kind of coming to fruition from what the doctor shared over the course of the first 4 years. And it was awful. It was awful.
No, I can't imagine just being in your shoes. And, up to that point, it sounded like life was more or less normal. You were growing and just things in life kind of looked like you'd expect for someone at that age. And then all of a sudden it just completely turns on its head. Like how difficult. And one of the questions just in preparing for this interview that I was thinking through is like the lessons that were, kind of baked into that experience. And so I'd love to kind of tease that out, because I really am a firm believer that, like you said with the token quote, there's all these like really difficult, painful things we go through in life, but my goodness, it can like form us, it can transform us, it can like teach us so much. So what lessons did you learn through this whole experience?
Yeah. Well, I'd probably go on for a long time on this one, but so like I said, the first 4 years were really, they were brutal. I remember watching the Red Sox come back and beat the Yankees, and I'm a huge New York Mets fan, so I was happily rooting for that. And just, it was when that happened, when Big Papi was, breaking his bat in the base hit over second to win the game in extras, or hitting his home run to win the game in extras, or Johnny Damon's hitting a grand slam to just absolutely wreck the Yanks in Game 7. Like that was probably the peak worst period for me. Like I was watching that and I mean, it was, and by worse, I mean like pain wise. Like I was literally, it felt like my body was on fire. Like I could remember watching that game and just being on fire. And so I really feel like there were 3 levels of pain for me over the course of those first 4 years. And the first 2 I was really cognizant of because they were obvious. The first one was the physical pain, right? Like you're just suffering. Like I'm just sitting there suffering. Like can't play baseball. I'm extracted from social life. It's just physically difficult to get around and be around and move. So there's the physical pain. But the next one is the emotional pain and the emotional suffering. So when I first got sick, I got all this attention, letters and notes and gifts and presents and everything along those lines. And then pretty much out of sight, out of mind, everybody else abandoned me. I was sort of isolated. I had my parents and I had my twin sister and my grandmother who really cared. Everybody else, aunts and uncles, other grandparents, people I thought were friends. It's like I didn't exist. And I sort of been wiped off the face of the planet. And it was very lonely. And I got bitter as all get up. I was, I don't know if you've ever seen It's a Wonderful Life, but there's this famous moment where sort of the evil character is like, you once called me a warped, frustrated old man. What are you but a warped, frustrated young man? And that was me. I'm like 14 years old, warped, frustrated, bitter, resentful of being abandoned, resentful of having to suffer, resentful of just very frustrated and angry over, in being imprisoned by this physical limitation. But the thing is like, I didn't necessarily have to be. My parents had found a different doctor and this really intense food regimen. It's called a specific carbohydrate diet. And we found a way for it to work for me. But it was like, I could have like 12 items of food. That includes like spices.
Wow.
So, I mean, I counted once. It was like 12 or 17. I don't remember what one. So like I would
Still.
go when I'd go to school, right? And it would be like, you're in 6th grade and it's an ice cream party, like looking at kids eating a sundae and I'm eating an overly ripe banana. It's like, that sucks. You go to the Super Bowl party and everybody's eating pizza and I'm eating dry, lightly salted chicken and lettuce with no salad dressing. It's like, that sucks. But it had the potential to work. Like we'd seen flashes and it worked at different periods. I would go through 2 or 3 months where I would be super healthy and then it would be back down. Anyway, so I had this physical pain and this emotional pain and this emotional bitterness, but I also had this tool, this food regimen that was at my disposal that could help me get healthy. And when I was 14, I was sitting in my room and my mom came into my room and she had 2 presents for me. And at that time, it was shortly after the Red Sox had won the World Series, and I had to be homeschooled the whole year because physically it was that bad. And so I was pretty down, pretty emotionally frustrated and all that stuff. And my mom, she just comes into my room and she's got 2 gifts for me. And the first gift is a wall-sized poster of Muhammad Ali. And at that time, Adidas was running this ad campaign that said, "Impossible is nothing." And so it was Muhammad Ali standing over Sonny Liston, yelling at him to get up and fight him like a real man, about to become heavyweight champion of the world. And then on the bottom, it says, "Impossible is nothing." And my mom, she just absolutely calls me out. And she's like, "I've been trying to will you to health. I've been trying to will you to put your mind and your heart and your everything into getting healthy. But you're sitting on the sidelines. You're not engaged. You're going through the motions. And the truth is, you can take incurable as a declaration, or you could take it as a dare to rise to the occasion of your life." So she shows me the poster and she's like, "Muhammad Ali said, impossible is just a made up word. Impossible is nothing. Impossible is a dare." And so she goes to this whole quote of Muhammad Ali. She's like, "Apply that to incurable. Incurable is just a word. It's nothing. It's a dare. It's not a declaration. It's a dare." And it's life daring you to rise to the occasion of it, to grow from it, to embrace it. So she hands me the second gift and it's a dog tag. And on the dog tag, it says, "Incurable is not a declaration. It's a dare." And she's like, "I'll continue to do everything I can to help you get healthy, but you never will until you get in the game. So get in the game." And so she absolutely called me out, and one of the most inspiring moments of my entire life. And I decided to take her up on it. I decided to take to the dare. I decided to, as Robert Downey Jr. would say, hug the cactus. I decided to confront the inner stuff and turn toward the inner storm. And nothing changed about my exterior life, man. Like nothing changed. The diet didn't change. My school didn't change. My family didn't change. Nothing about my external life changed. Nothing about my external environment changed. First 4 years, I missed 250 days of school. The next 8 years through college, I missed less than 10. I grew to be 6 feet tall. I went away to school. I was, for all intents and purposes, you couldn't tell that I had a chronic illness. And what made the difference was doing the inner work. And the original question is a really long answer to it, but the original question is like, what's one of the life lessons that you learned? And so I go to the biggest one, which is you got to confront the dragon within. All the crap that was happening inside of me, that I was bottling up, that I was pushing down, that I was ignoring, that I refused to confront, the anger, the bitterness, the frustration, the sense that this was unfair. I have 2 sisters. Like, why did I get it? One of them's a twin. Why did I get it? Everybody else gets to live a normal life. Why do I have to sit over here and eat this disgusting food and in order to just be normal? And then confront a lot of the bitterness and the pain of other people and being abandoned and not walking around so angry all of the time at everyone. That was the lesson. Like, I got to turn toward the storm. I can't run away from it. I have to turn toward it. I have to embrace it more than anything.
Wow. What a story. So much I want to say. One of the things that you just brought to mind was this whole battle with ourselves, right? I think that so often, I know in my life, myself has been like the scariest person to face. and it's just fascinating. So I love your insight on that. Like, why is that such a scary thing? Why do we avoid it so much? Like, why do we run in the opposite direction? It seems like we'd almost, be more willing to face like these insurmountable like enemies on the outside than just look interiorly and face ourselves?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think one of the reasons is that every spiritual master, every master of the inner life has essentially said, if you want to dive deep and look at yourself, you have to do it with someone else. Like you cannot do it alone. It's not like a David and Goliath situation where you're out and you're looking at this big Goliath and you're like, okay, well, what weapons do I have? Like I'll just fight, or I'll be trained how to fight, and then I'll just like go fight. Like the inner world, because of the natural inclination of the emotional life and the inner life to protect ourselves and to deceive ourselves, it can be so hard to unravel and really understand it. And you actually need someone else to reflect you back to you to really be able to understand you. So part of it is just practical. Like you can't really do it alone. And none of the masters of the inner world, and we could be talking about Buddha, we could be talking about St. Francis de Sales, we could be talking about modern mindfulness practitioners. Like everybody talks about having a guide to help you enter into the inner life, make sense of what's going on. One of the things that has really become true and that we've developed a deeper understanding about from a psychological perspective is that we're made up of a bunch of inner parts. And multiple personality disorder is a disorder of something that is actually natural and good within us, which is when something happens, like we win the lottery, multiple parts of us react to the same thing. One of the simplest examples of it would be like, not the lottery, but like if you're going to go play a game, and part of you is excited, but part of you is nervous, right? Like you feel both emotions at the same time. It's because there's literally a part of you that feels the nerves and a part of you that is excited. Like I love baseball. I would always be nervous because I was afraid. There's a part of me that was always afraid of failing. And then I would also be really excited because there's a part of me that loves baseball, that loves to play the game, right? So you go to get married and there's a part of you that loves your spouse, but there's another part of you that comes from a broken home. And it's that arrested development part. It's that 10-year-old sitting in your parents' living room, like hearing that your parents are getting divorced, that is also reacting to this idea of getting married. That's like, marriage is a sham. You're only going to hurt people. It's not real. Like that part of you is, until that part of you is healed, like you can't contain that part of you from reacting. And for you to make sense of all of those different parts and how they interact with one another is not something for someone to do by themselves. Like you need to be able to do it with the help of somebody else.
So good. One of the principles that we operate on is that healing happens in relationships.
Yeah.
Healing happens in relationship. And it's exactly for the reason you said. And yeah, no, so good. And I think the other thing that comes to mind when you say all that is the idea of blind spots. I think you articulated that really well, that there's literally things that you can't see or access or work through on your own. And there's different, parts of this. Like since we're using the sports analogy, it's like, I was a baseball player as well through the years and played with some incredible guys. I was never like at the D1 level, but I played with guys who D1 got drafted, all that stuff. And, whether it was them or me, someone, not as skilled, there were certain parts of my swing or, feeling or whatever that maybe I was doing wrong that I couldn't see or know until a coach came up to me and said, hey, the way you're fielding that ball, like try this, try picking it or funneling it this way. Try, the way you're swinging, like loosen your hands a little bit more, drop your elbow, all of that. And I went through coaching like that. And it's amazing, like the transformation you could see. But I could have, honestly, Jack, I could have spent like a year trying to like critique my own swing, and I probably would have missed a lot of that.
Yeah.
And so I think it's so profound. Like you have a coach, a guide in your life who's able to kind of point out those blind spots and then give you a bit of a plan to work through that.
Yes. One of the most amazing things is actually, it's not the most masculine thing in the world, but it's art. Art is some of the best. It contains some of the best tools to elicit sort of hidden exiles within you. I was working with one of my clients, and I know we'll talk about what I do at some point, but I was working with one of them and really discovered that he was having some trouble in his marriage, and that one of his main pain points that he couldn't get past was actually something that happened to him when he was pre-verbal. So like he couldn't communicate it. So he couldn't share with me what was really happening or what was really driving this behavior that was causing a lot of conflict in his marriage. And so I asked him to draw himself in conflict with his wife. Just draw your image of what's happening. And what he drew unlocked so much of what was happening because the content almost didn't matter. Like what happened to him didn't matter. What happened was how he felt in that context and how it keeps getting duplicated over and over and over again in different contexts, right? He keeps having the same emotional reaction regardless of the content because there's a part of him that keeps emerging. So he could never see that part, understand that part, speak to that part until I was sort of able to help draw that out of him through the art of drawing, which is an amazing thing. But, you're never going to think of that on your own, right? You're never going to come to that on your own. It's like, how am I going to break this pattern in my life? How am I going to trust people again? How can I possibly believe that love is worth it or that setting myself up to be hurt again is worth it? It's like, well, you have to talk to that part of you that thinks it's not worth it. And you have to understand it. And understand the role it's playing in your life and know that that part of you is good. It just doesn't want you to get hurt. It's not helping you right now, but it's still good. It desires your good. So how do we engage with that part of you and understand it? And you cannot do that alone.
You can't. No, it's so good. And I love, man, what a great example on how helpful to that, client of yours. My goodness. I'm sure you know this, but that's like what therapists will do. I know you're not a therapist and you weren't trying to give therapy, but that's what therapists will do in trauma therapy. I've been through it myself, and like the use of art therapy is so important because my understanding of it, one theory of like the brain is that we have one side of our brain is more emotional and the other side of our brain is more logical. And the logical side of our brain is the part of our brain that controls language and, math and things like that. The emotional side of our brain is more controlling, reaction. And like if we're in danger, then it will, kind of take control. And literally when you go through something traumatic, the logical part of your brain actually constricts. It chemically constricts. It gets smaller. The emotional side gets bigger so that you can react and save your life, right? Think of, extreme examples of a tiger chasing you or other examples like, we're talking about like your parents getting divorced. And so the pre-verbal thing that happened with that client is so interesting to me because that is similar even with people who are post-verbal who can speak and things. They might not even be able to articulate what they had been through because the place where the trauma is encoded is in that emotional side of their brain. And so the art therapy side of it can help people go beyond the language. And one other thing that I think is just so fascinating that I loved learning, I want to share with everyone listening is there's a part of our brain, I think it's called Broca's area, if I'm getting that right. And that part of our brain does play a role in like controlling language, helping us put things to words. And that part of our brain will actually go offline when we've endured a trauma, or maybe more contextual to that sort of trauma when things are triggered, which is so fascinating. So no, I couldn't help but share all that because I think it's so helpful. And especially if people are, experiencing this right now, maybe they've been through some traumatic, their family falling apart, their parents getting divorced, whatever. And, they are like, struggling to like put it into words. Like, well, there you go. There's some of the science of it, maybe not perfectly articulated, but it's certainly helpful.
Yeah. And the other thing is because you can't, this is one of the things that I learned about myself as well. It's like, because you can't articulate it, because you're not exactly sure what's happening, you will actually try and replay your trauma in other contexts across time in an attempt to try and win, right? Like our brain categorizes it as a loss. Something happened and we got hurt. And we want to replay the circumstances again across time and across other relationships so that we can win and avoid that hurt. So like for me, right, like I get sick and I perceive people all over the place as abandoning me. Mm-hmm. So in my mind, I'm not conscious of this, but in my mind, like when you get close to people who don't have to love you, like mom and dad, like they will burn you. So what did I start doing? I started burning those relationships before they had a chance to burn me. So it keeps happening over and over again where relationships end prematurely, or I make sure I'm the one who breaks up with the girl, whether or not I have a good reason. It's like, what's happening there? Why is that pattern repeating itself? Well, it's because I don't want to have the same thing happen again. I don't want to get so vulnerable I don't want to go vulnerable past the point of knowing that I'm going to get hurt to a similar degree as this other circumstance. So I'm going to cut this relationship off so that doesn't happen. So I don't have to trust you. So I don't have to be vulnerable with you. So I don't have to be in relationship with you. And so I just had really superficial relationships for a really long period of time. And And it was specifically because I was replaying that trauma. I'm going to end this before you have a chance to end it with me.
So good. I love that language that you put to that, like how we're replaying the trauma. I've heard people talk about it in other ways, but that, like, for some reason really sticks well with me, how we're attempting to turn a loss into a win. It's super good. I think the other side of that coin too, that people have heard maybe us talk about in this show, is this idea of like repetition compulsion, how we might end up repeating behavior that harmed us or we despise.
Yes.
And it was just so interesting, fascinating, and such a big pain point, by the way, Jack, for people like us who, like me, who come from broken families, because we saw something that was very broken and painful, and we went through that ourselves with our parents' marriage falling apart or whatever dysfunction at home, and we're like terrified of repeating that in our own lives, especially if there were extreme things like infidelity or whatever. And so that's like a major concern. So this whole idea of repetition compulsion and trying to avoid that is just like such a big concern, even if it's something that's not like conscious. It's somewhere, in our subconscious, often pulling at us. So I'm curious your like insights or advice on that side of the coin of kind of this fear of going down this path that we really don't want to go on.
Yeah. Well, so there's so many different things that can happen. So my dad's parents got divorced. My grandfather was unfaithful, and it was just an absolute abject mess of a home, right? So my dad decided he was going to be the exact opposite of his dad, right? Like that was his reaction. That was his play. And he was going to go to the extreme other side. So you can do that. Other people don't want to hurt anybody else. So they'll isolate, or they'll, depending on when divorce happens, if it happens in the preteen years, let's say 13, 14, one of the most natural things to do is to sexualize your pain because you have a sexual awakening. And so you start sexualizing your pain, whether that be creating fantasies or scenarios in which you're in complete control. So like porn is can be a big challenge for people coming out of divorce, because one of the things that porn does for a person is it puts you entirely in control of your whole scenario and of your entire environment. And people who come from broken families, it's like, you're not in control of your dad. You're not in control of your mom. You're not in control of where you live. You're not in control of whose house maybe you're going to be in. You're not in control of how you're spoken to, whether dad keeps crapping on mom or mom keeps crapping on dad. Like, you're not in control of anything. And so you're looking to have some form of control. So you turn to something that you can control, or, you want to numb, right? So what's one of the biggest things that can happen for people who deal with a lot of pain is that they don't want to feel what they're feeling anymore. So they'll drink excessively, or they'll smoke weed and get high. It's like when things get too difficult, you smoke weed and you get high. Or you become a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? You start doing the things that you hate were done to you. And that part is like, this happens all the time with parents. So you become a parent and all of a sudden you're like, oh my gosh, that was my dad speaking, right? That wasn't me. And they have this realization. They're like, oh crap, I'm turning into my mom. And it's like, you're not turning into your mom. You're not turning into your dad. It's literally the only context you have for parenthood, right? So it's like, I want to go into a relationship. Okay, what's your only context for romance? You have a tendency to then duplicate that over time, because it's like, I don't know what to do when a woman comes to me. Let's say I'm a man and my parents got divorced, and a woman comes to me and she's emotionally needy. And I only ever saw my dad say to my mom, like, shut up and get me a beer, or like, shut up and make dinner. And now I have a girlfriend who's crying excessively, and it doesn't make any sense to my male, logical, emotional brain. And my only context is shut up and deal with it and serve me. It's like, what are you going to do in that moment? For a number of people, the response is, I'm going to do some form of what I saw, because I'm just reacting. I'm not thinking about it. And so I do it, especially if you idolize that parent in particular. And part of the divorce was a shattering of the character of the person who you really loved. Then it's even more complicated, because you're wanting to imitate someone, and there's a part of you that always wanted to imitate this person that you idealized. And now the idealization is shattered, and you're not sure what to do with that. Anyway, all of that, across all of these contexts, the content almost doesn't matter, and the reaction almost doesn't matter anywhere near as much as what is the function driving your behavior. A popular way to look at this is like, what's the story you're telling yourself? is the story you're telling yourself, which is like, my grandfather was a piece of crap. My father's a piece of crap. I'm a piece of crap. And this is what we do. This is what the men in our family do. It's like, well, where does that come from? Why does a part of you feel that way? Why are you responding like that? Or I have to drink because I can't confront this pain. Well, why? Because I can't handle it. Okay, well, let's figure out what that came from. Because the drive to drink, the drive to porn, like those drives are not bad, right? Like it's literally your body trying to help you get through the day. And what needs to happen is healing needs to happen. Freedom needs to emerge from that healing so that you can then turn to that part of you. And it's like, I know what you're doing. I know why you're doing it. Thank you, but I don't need you anymore. I don't need you to do that for me anymore. I can do hard things, or I'm going to break the pattern. I'm going to learn how to love. That was, again, a long-winded answer, but
So good.
it's a complex question.
It is. No, I mean, we could do a whole episode on it. There's so much you said there. I love the acknowledgement that behavior served some sort of a purpose. Not to say it was good behavior, not justifying it, but it's like, hey, if porn was your way, or alcohol or drugs or whatever was your way of dealing with the pain, it served some purpose. And so, but then saying, okay, I want to move beyond that. I no longer need that. I want to outgrow it. Because I really think that's like so key to dealing with any sort of pain and problems in our lives, is like we need to just outgrow that pain and those problems in our lives, and obviously heal as well. And so much good stuff. And I do think that's possible. And I want to get into like kind of reprogramming. But two other things I'd love to hear your thoughts before we move on. One is just this whole idea that each of us are living out a story. You said kind of, what story are you essentially telling with your life? And it's true, like each of us is living out a story. And I think when we think of any movie or novel we've read, it's like the hero usually starts in some broken way, or they're facing some big problem, right? That debilitates them or prevents them from getting what they want. But then they go through a period of transformation, and every story I've seen always happens with a form of a guide, like we've already talked about. So I think there's something to be said there as well. Like what story are you living out now, and what story do you want to be living out? And then what's the transformation that needs to occur in order for you to do that? And then the final thing on the sexualized pain, I was just going to comment on. Jay Stringer has been on this podcast. He wrote an awesome book called Unwanted. I definitely recommend you guys check it out if this is an area of interest, talking about, unwanted sexual behavior and things like that. He quotes Dr. Patrick Carnes, who's a leading expert on sexual addiction. He said that 87% of people who struggle with a sexual addiction come from a broken family, which is profound. And so I love that you kind of hit on that point too, because I think this audience, people like me, are dealing with these sorts of things or have dealt with it in the past. So I'd love to hear your comments, and then switch over to how do we reprogram this? How do we transform?
Yeah, well, porn, addiction, alcohol, like they're extremely destructive. I think the nuance the line that I'm trying to walk is like the part of you that drove you to those outlets is not bad. Them as outlets is destructive. It's the old adage of like, hate the sin, love the sinner, right? It's like, hate the porn, love the part of you that wants to protect you. When I work with clients in particular who are addicted to porn, sometimes you have to do who don't want to be addicted to porn, like you have to do some temporary measures or some coping mechanisms to sort of break the cycle and break the habit. But in the long haul, when you heal the relationship, the original relationship, the part where the pain emerged from, when you heal that dynamic, the great majority of the drive to porn is gone. And it's really understanding that not all, but so much of addiction can be significantly healed if you heal the relationship, or if you heal from the experience that really drove you to cope with the pain through this mechanism. So I definitely want to add that clarification. Essentially what you were saying was decide who to be and go be it, and wanting to break the cycle and the story that you tell yourself. Mm-hmm. One of the biggest things for me personally, and one of the aspects of my work and as a parent, one of the things that I really strive, because it's been so important for me to share with my kids, is reclaiming what freedom you do have and reclaiming your responsibility for your own life. I know we have a mutual love for Viktor Frankl, the founder of logotherapy, and in his book Man's Search for Meaning, which is just top 5 favorite book of mine of all time, he talks about the last of human freedoms and this idea that regardless of anything else, what can never be taken from a human being is the ability to choose their attitude in a given circumstance. The exception to that is like when you lose your mental faculties. So provided you have your mental faculties, you're not struggling from dementia or Alzheimer's or let's say multiple personality disorder. But if you have your mental faculties, there's literally no power on earth. Not even God himself has given himself the power to force you to respond in a particular way and to claim that freedom that you do have. Like people who've gone through a significant trauma or significant suffering, it's like the first step is to acknowledge the pain and to acknowledge the storm that you're in or that you've gone through and to acknowledge its impact on you. But the second step, and arguably the most important one, is what are you going to do about it? You have the freedom to choose how you respond, your attitude, your outlook, how you look at it. The first 4 years of me being sick, like I had a terrible attitude. Victim, impossibility, bitterness, resentment, anger. When things turned around, it was an attitude of possibility. Like, what can I control? One of the great images of this is Jesus hugging his cross. Like when I didn't grow up with any particular faith, and I remember the first time I heard the story of Jesus hugging his cross and him willing the suffering that was imposed upon him. It was like, that's it. That's it. That's what I want to do. Like that is the most noble thing a person can do, is regardless of their circumstances, regardless of what's being imposed on them, to choose to embrace it, to walk toward the storm and to extract as much meaning as they can from the experience so that they can go turn around and be something and someone extraordinary for other people, right? Like the story of Jesus from just a pure human perspective is, I'm going to hug this cross and I'm going to embrace it with everything that I have so that I can turn around and give abundant life to every other person on the planet, right? It's like, okay, you have the actual ability to transform your suffering into something that blesses every other person that you meet for the rest of your life. Like no one can decide whether or not that happens but you. And claiming that is, I think, that changed my life. And I think it changes anyone's life who's going through a particular struggle.
I think there's such power in kind of looking beyond your own pain. And there's this idea too of like the helper's high. I'm learning about it recently, so I don't know a lot about it, but just how like there's research behind the fact that when you look beyond your own pain and you help other people, and the example I was reading was in like the context of like volunteering for some organization, let's say, there's like literally documentable outcomes, benefits that come from that. And so that it takes this whole idea that like love is healing to like a whole new level, because it like literally is healing. And so I love that. That's beautiful. And I think that's like the right question to ask. Like, what now? Like, what am I going to do with this hand I've been dealt? What am I going to do with it? Because like you said, so many of us who've been through pain and trauma, can fall into that victim mentality and just kind of stay stuck there. And what I've seen too in the people that I've walked with, as well as in my own life, is that so often I think our efforts at healing and growth can become kind of fruitless because of that, maybe hidden underneath the surface. Like we're spinning our tires in mud and never really getting anywhere. And so we might be doing good things like listening to podcasts, reading books, going on retreats, whatever, because we want that transformation that we're talking about. We want to become that person, but for some reason that gap is just not being closed. Yeah. And so I'm curious, you already mentioned a couple of things I think are really helpful when it comes to that, but like, how do we actually transform? Like what's worked in your life and what advice do you give in terms of how do you actually transform and become that person that you want to be?
Yeah. Yeah, we could do a whole podcast just on this exact question. Yeah. And I'll talk about it from a personal example and maybe even just some work with some clients.
Sure.
I remember when I tried to start turning things around in my life, I was still in a lot of pain, and it was rough. It was still in that rough period. And I remember my mom had a rough day and she left the house for whatever reason. She had to go run an errand or something. And I knew that she loved to end her day with tea, and she was coming back late. And so I made her a cup of tea without her asking. And it was like, I don't know, it's like she was 4 and realizing what Christmas is for the first time. Like it was that level of joy and appreciation. Like to this day, she will talk about that cup of tea that I made her. And how impactful it was, because she knew how much I was suffering that I thought of her. But what she never really understood was how impactful that was for me. It's like, I can do something good for someone else. I don't have to live in this cesspool that is my inner life and my inner thoughts and my own pain. I don't have to steep in this misery every second of every single day, I can actually do something small to bless someone. And so any proper answer on types of deep critical questions like the one you just asked has a both and component to it. So it's like if you're in a rut and you're feeling like crap and you are just miserable and you can't get out of bed in the morning, like do something for somebody else. Get on your feet. And that's enormously helpful. It's like I'm still a useful human being, like I still have something to offer the world. That's a really useful thing to know, especially when you're in the dark part. Then at the same time, find a guide who is going to walk with you into the depths of the darkness of your own subconscious and your own inner life. Find someone who you trust, who can help you, and go confront the inner demons. Like go do the inner work. And not for you, not because, you're worth it and you're all these things, even though you are, but so that you can go out and actually bless other people. One of the problems with modern therapy is it's like, we'll just sit and talk about your feelings and sit in your own inner life and only talk about your inner life and never do anything with it. It's like the purpose is to become a self-gift. Now, you might be sitting there being like, okay, I want to become a self-gift. I want to do the inner work. I don't have anybody that I can go to. It's like, what do I do then? Well, there is something that you can do. If you look at the people who have achieved greatness in their life, and they're all names you're like, I know that they've achieved greatness. Like you go Mother Teresa, you go Gandhi, Alexander Solzhenitsyn, Abraham Lincoln. It's like you go to these people and you look at their life. They had a compelling vision of who they were trying to become. So let's just look at Gandhi. Gandhi's vision was to become like unto God. I want to become a man who made the invisible God visible. That's what Gandhi was trying to do. It's like, that's my objective. I have a compelling vision for my own personal character and the type of person that I want to be. I want to be God's hand and feet on earth. That's my goal. That's my objective. And then he coupled to get that together with, I think they're the 11 vows of Gandhi. So I call this the moral code of being. So it developed a moral code of being for him to be accountable to, and for him to look every night and be like, okay, I'm trying to become this person. These rules are actually capable of bringing out this vision to life. How am I doing on these rules, right? Like systems drive behavior. It's like those 11 vows were Gandhi's system that drove the behavior that led to the outcome. If you're a business mind, you're thriving on this, right? That led to the outcome that you're desiring, right? You start all the way at the beginning. Now you may sitting there and be like, becoming like unto God. That's really lofty. Well, look at someone like Alexander Solzhenitsyn. If you don't know Solzhenitsyn, he is credited with doing the majority of the work of taking down the Soviet Union from within the Soviet Union. So Solzhenitsyn was a political prisoner. I think he spent a decade in the gulags of Soviet Russia, which is hard labor in Siberia. And when he was in the prisons, in the gulag, suffering some of the worst suffering you can conceive of in humanity. It's top 3 is the Soviet gulags, which still exists, by the way. He's in this prison camp, eating this watered down soup and bread and doing hard labor in the frigid temperatures of Siberia. What he realizes is he has to own part of the blame for ending up where he ended up, because he participated in the lies that led to communist Russia, that allowed a system to be created for people like him to be imprisoned without due process. Wow. So he made a decision, and this is really simple. He's like, I am going to become a man of truth. There will not be a single lie that will ever pass through me ever again. It's like a lack of truth created massive amounts of pain for me and everybody I'm in prison with. So I'm going to become a man of truth. So like, let's say you had a really, really mean dad, and the criticism that you feel and just the incapacity to do anything because you're just crippled by that constant criticism. It's like, okay, become the kindest person you possibly can. Don't let criticism flow out of your mouth. And then that's the vision of who you want to be. It's like, I want to be an incredibly kind person. Or Jordan Peterson will say this, I want to be the kind of person everybody can rely on at my dad's funeral, right? Like, okay, that's a really noble vision. What's going to lead me there? And you don't have to pick the ultimate vision. You don't have to pick the ultimate thing. Like, it's just start walking in the direction of a noble vision of who you could be. And oftentimes that's enough to elevate your life.
Still good. I love all of that. I love the vision component, finding a guide. And I love the idea that you just threw out that the guide doesn't need to be someone who is even alive right now. If you're
Yes.
not ready for that, I think ultimately it is good to have someone who's mentoring you, who's walking with you, who's able to like have real insight into your life. But yeah, we can learn, we can be guided through books, through podcasts, through whatever, just
Yes.
like you mentioned. And then, yeah, going back to Frankel, I just love that idea of, do something for someone else, do something for someone else. Like,
Yeah.
as I know you would say, Frankel essentially found that the thing that we want most as humans is meaning. And he defined meaning as like basically a deep reason to live that's bigger than yourself. And that's what I hear you saying. And his logotherapy, which is essentially bringing people into, and feel free to add or correct anything I'm saying, but his logotherapy, which was essentially bringing people through that process of finding that compelling vision for their life and just finding a deep reason to live that was bigger than themselves, was very effective, more effective than modern therapy, like you're saying.
Yeah.
And, he ran a clinic in Vienna. I know we've talked about this, Jack, but he ran a clinic in Vienna for patients who were struggling with suicide. They wanted to kill themselves. And it said that, through logotherapy, it was so effective that he never lost a single patient, which is so fascinating. And so I think there is such power in, while not neglecting yourself and your suffering, like we do need to heal, there is so much power in healing in that act of doing something for someone else and going beyond our own pain.
Yeah. I mean, I was one of the clients that I was working with who was sexually abused by a sibling, and the client hadn't talked about it for 40 years and decided to talk about it. And a big reason why this individual didn't want to talk about it is because, like, I don't want to wallow in it. I just don't want to wallow in it. I don't want to have to talk about it and all this stuff. But it was inhibiting this person's ability to love, right? It was inhibiting their capacity to love. And so and be loved by other people. And I remember how much of an unburdening experience it was for this individual for me to be like, we're going to explore and enter deep into that experience of trauma so that you can draw meaning from it. And that meaning can bring you to a place in your life in which you are better capable to not only handle life, but be able to bring tremendous good to the rest of the world. Like, there was this one woman that I knew near where I lived. I only met her twice. She went through incredibly difficult times. In the course of 1 year, she lost a child, she lost her husband, she lost both of her parents, and she had to take over the family farm. And she went through a process internally to draw so much meaning from it that in the last 20 years of her life, she served at her local parish as the person that everyone would call or not call. She would just show up in the darkest moments of their life. So when a child died unexpectedly in the community, this woman, her Anita was her name, she would show up with pie. And oftentimes she was the only person who could sit in a room and help grieving parents make it through the day. She was oftentimes the only person who could walk into a room of someone who just lost a parent and help them feel understood and not alone in the world. And so when she died, I mean, she was farm girl, Indiana. She did all the hidden things you do in a church, like clean the toilets and pick up the flyers on the floor and all the hidden stuff, turn the lights on, everything. Nobody, there's nothing visible about her. When she died, the entire county came out for a funeral because at some point or another, they went through something difficult, and she showed up with pie and the kind of understanding that only comes from someone who drew meaning from their suffering. And it's like the thing that she most wished never happened has become her greatest gift to love people. And that's possible for literally everyone, like literally everybody listening to this podcast right now. No matter the scale of the difficult thing that you've been through, it can become your superpower to love other people and to uplift other people. And the only person who gets to determine whether or not that's the case, like, is you. It is you. 100% it's you.
So good. I love it. And I think that that's a great place to end on. But before we do, I just want to ask about, I know you offer mentorship. So please tell us a bit about that, like what it is that you offer and how people can find you online.
Yeah, absolutely. So you can find me in two places. You can find me at jackbeers.com, or you can find me at thecatholicmentor.com. Jackbeers.com is a place for one-on-one or group coaching. It's really meant for me to walk with you in a short season of your life, usually about 6 weeks. And I run people through a program called Rise. And it's really a system of self-awareness and deepening your self-awareness. The phrase I usually say is know thyself so you can give thyself. So it's sort of a 6-week boot camp with one-on-one coaching mixed into it. And you can find that in both sites and both places. If you're looking for specifically Catholic accompaniment, that's why you go to thecatholicmentor.com. And that's a form of daily accompaniment, really an elevation of Catholic psychology, spirituality, and anthropology to help you kind of face the storms in your life and draw meaning from them.
So good to truly be that guide. And man, I've learned a lot from you, even in this interview. So I can only imagine how helpful that mentorship would be. And so I definitely encourage you guys to at least check that out, learn more about it, get some information about what it would look like to work with Jack. But Jack, just want to say thank you so much for coming on the show, for sharing your wisdom and your story with us. I know we're all better for it. And just in closing, just want to give you the final word. What final advice, encouragement would you leave to everyone listening right now before we sign off?
Well, thank you, Joey. It's like, we've only gotten to know each other a little bit, and I feel so blessed by you already. So I look forward to our relationship to deepen as well.
Likewise.
Last word is you can do hard things. You are made to do hard things, and you will become a shadow of who you could be if you don't.
There's so much that we discussed in this episode that it can be pretty easy to feel kind of overwhelmed by it all. And so my challenge to you is this: what's just one thing that really resonated with you in this conversation? Just take action on that one thing today or this week. Make a simple plan to just act on that, whatever that looks like. That's it. That's all you have to do. And so if you want to re-listen to maybe figure out what the one thing is, feel free. But if you know it, just make a plan. Take action on that one thing. And I promise you, if you stay with it, you're going to get some result in your life. And if you come from a divorce or broken family, or you know someone who maybe does come from a divorce or broken family, we offer more resources at Restored than just this podcast. Those resources include things like a book, free video courses. They're free now. We might change that in the future. Speaking engagements, a free assessment, online community, and so much more. And all of our resources are designed to help you heal from the trauma that you've endured and build virtue so you can break that cycle and build a better life. And so if you want to view those resources for yourself or maybe someone that you know, just go to restoredministry.com/resources or just click on the link in the show notes. That wraps up this episode. If you know someone who's struggling because of their parents' divorce or broken marriage, feel free to share this podcast with them. Feel free to even text them now to say, hey, I listened to this. I thought of you. I thought it might be helpful. I promise you, even if they don't maybe say it, they're going to be very grateful for you sharing it with them. I wish someone had done that for me years ago. And in closing, always remember, you are not alone. We're here to help you feel whole again and break the cycle of dysfunction and divorce in your own life. And keep in mind the words of C.S. Lewis, who said, you can't go back and change the beginning, but you can start where you are and change the ending.